Good evening, everybody. First, I want to give a big shout to Edgar. As you can see, he took off his jacket. He's feeling at home. By the way, you should see him in the office. Every time I talk to him, he says, "I just finished the shiur Tanya in the office." So I don't know when he works, but Baruch Hashem. And right? That's what Baal Shem Tov was told. If she puts crown height for Rockaway. I don't know why we haven't seen each other till now, and Baruch Hashem for status and everything else is. But Rabbi Klein, I was thinking, Elecha. You know, what's Elecha? Elecha is about taking Yiddishkeit, Torah mitzvahs, taking Nigla, taking Chassidus, and the Baal Shem Tov was all about, bringing together. Elecha is about personalizing it. And as we spoke earlier on the phone, who starts learning about Hanukkah 8 weeks before Hanukkah? Nobody, right? But if you want to have Nigla and Chassidus together, you have to have 8 weeks, maybe even double that. But Mitzvah Hashem, and I just love the name Elecha. It's about taking Torah mitzvahs and living within in such a way that it becomes yours. And it's something which is close to the heart. And there's a hope that the Mitzvah Hashem we should be able to learn, to experience, and we should have a tremendous amount of Halacha. Beis Gavriel, as we all know, named after Rabbi Gabi Rivki Holzberg, the Shluchim in Mumbai. It's a built on Mesiras Nefesh, and now Mitzvah Hashem, as we learn about Hanukkah, we should have the Mesiras Nefesh in our own lives to be able to be on Neres Lahoyer.
Amen. Amen. Okay, I'm just going to begin with the bracha of Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Shehakol Nehiyeh B'Dvarei. So, first, a huge yasher koach to the Rav and to the Shul for hosting this, making this possible, and to all those who are involved, Rabbi Edgar and others as well who were involved in putting this together, making sure that this was something that we could all experience and all enjoy. And just like the Rav mentioned, just posting this online, people were sort of reminding me that Hanukkah comes at the end of Kislev and not at the end of Cheshvan. People thought that I'm just v'chlal, like what are you talking about Hanukkah for? And even on one of the groups, after I explained, no, like it's 8 weeks. We have 8 weeks now to prepare for the 8 days of Hanukkah. And people said, let Cheshvan be Cheshvan, and we'll start preparing for Hanukkah in Kislev. I personally cannot manage Cheshvan without Hanukkah. But some can. But Cheshvan is bitter. It's Mar Cheshvan. It's dark, and it's cold, and we sort of let go with one hand the Chagei Tishrei, all of those exalted moments of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and we're not quite yet at Hanukkah, and it can feel sometimes completely disorienting. And so for me personally, it's not a matter of calculation. It's just oxygen. I have to breathe, and Hanukkah is my breathing. And so I'd like a little bit for us to be connecting to the oxygen of the Ruach Chaim of Torah, and not just any Torah, but the Torah, like the Rav was saying, the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, which is a Torah mamish of life. Everybody knows the Baal Shem Tov's birthday is Chai Elul. The Baal Shem Tov's whole thing is Chai, is living. Everything has to be alive. Because you can have something on the outside that looks like it's fully formed and existent, and it's true on the level of a body, right? It's there, and it has all the different parts that a body ought to have, and it exists, it's there. But to the degree that the soul is dim, to that exact degree, there's something deficient in the functionality of the body. And this is the way that it is across the board. And most people only discover, I believe a bit too late, but when they do discover it, that Judaism has both a body and a soul. It isn't so simple, where it's just, the engagement with Torah and mitzvahs. There's a body to Yiddishkeit, and there's a neshama to Yiddishkeit. And to the degree that we are detached from the soul of the experience of our subject, lighting Hanukkah candles, whether it's shaking lulav on Sukkot, eating matzah on Pesach, all the different mitzvahs that we have, tefillin, tzitzis, and so on. So on the outside, it looks like it's functioning, and it becomes somewhat of a society or a culture. But something really important is missing, because the thing that's missing isn't just something missing, it's the thing. Right? It's the essence of the thing. It's the neshama of Torah. And the Baal Shem Tov wanted to bring that back to our nation as we get ready to begin to prepare for the ultimate geula, which we're on the threshold of. And that's increasingly true as the years pass, as the decades pass. Everybody could feel it. We're at the end. There's even a song that came out of our town, the 5 towns in New York. The Thank You Hashem Chaver put out a song. I think it might have even been the title of the album. that we're mamish at the end. I don't think in Poland in 1300 they were singing this. We're mamish at the end. They didn't have that feeling, even though they believed afal pishis mamea im kol ze achakaloi b'chol yom shiyaveh. There was always a faith that Mashiach is coming, mamish balt. Mashiach's coming today. But today, everybody feels it. I don't even believe it's just limited to the sort of, the religious Jewish community. Generally in the world, there's a feeling that we're on the threshold of something very, very radically different. The world is changing in millions of ways. And part of being able to hold on in these times is to make sure that our Judaism isn't just like a cardboard cutout, but it's fully alive, absolutely alive, invested and infused with soul, with neshama. And so if you have to think about, what is the body of Judaism, what is the soul of Judaism, very basically it's a Mishnah, which refers to hein, a turn of phrase, Likutei Halachos. That everything having to do with doing, as it relates to Judaism, learning all of the detailed parameters of Jewish law and the various mitzvos and all the different behavior-oriented experiences of Judaism, that is referred to in the Mishnah by the word guf, by the word body. The neshama of Torah is the meaning, the kavana, the intention, which already kadmoinim long before the Baal Shem Tov taught, that the neshama of a mitzvah is the kavana, right, is our intention. What's our focus? Not just what are the mitzvos in terms of how to learn, like what to do, but what are the mitzvos? Here we add a crucially important word, for. What are the mitzvos for? Right? Not just what are they and how to do them. What are they for? What are we intended to gain from them? How are they supposed to shape us, mold us, train us, enable us to ascend, to expand, to grow, and to do our part in helping the whole world grow and expand so that we can meet the Geula, which is our ultimate goal. As we're heading, Geula shares almost the same etymological root as the word goal. The goal is Geula, it's goal, it's Geula. It's all about redemption, and that's where we're headed. And the whole entire system of the guf, of the body of Judaism, is all a system which, if we approach it with the kavana, and we learn and we take the time long before it comes Erev Chanukah and you quickly run to Kosher Kingdom and buy some wax candles, and long before that, to start to figure out, what am I trying to gain? Like, what is Chanukah for? So that when we have a fully activated body, when we have the guf of halacha invested with the neshama of consciousness, of kavana, of presence of mind, of depth, of meaning, so then we start to look at halacha very differently. And it isn't like a book of laws, but it's an immersive spiritual program for expanded consciousness. It's a mamash, like we're saying, it's a program that enables a person to ascend, to transcend, to tap into their neshama and open the valve so that they can be the light that they were intended to be and bring the light that they were intended to be to a very darkened world. And this is the focus of what our little series, now these 8 weeks, and Be'ezus Hashem beyond, but for these 8 weeks leading up to Chanukah will be. What we're going to be learning together with Hashem's help are various drushos, discourses, in a very unique sefer that's referred to as Likutei Halachos. Likutei Halachos, on the surface, just the word of it means a collection of laws. But we have our collections of laws, whether it's the Rambam, whether it's the Shulchan Aruch, the Aruch HaShulchan, Mishnah Berurah. We have a collection of laws. What's the sefer Likutei Halachos? What's unique about this particular collection of laws? And so we have to understand that the word halachos, which we translate and associate with laws, doesn't actually mean laws. The word halacha doesn't mean law. What's the shoresh, apropos at least to last week's parsha, right? What's the shoresh of the word halacha? Is the Hebrew word lech, which means to go, which means to be propelled, right? To go from point A to point B. And so this Likutei Halachos isn't a collection of laws, right? Although it applies, as we're going to see, to all of the different laws in the Dalet Chalkei Shulchan Aruch. This collection of halachos is teaching us how to utilize those laws, the exterior sort of body of the Jewish experience, to understand how to be propelled, like how to use it to move, to grow, so that it isn't just the same Chanukah again and again. And we're Jews, and this is our culture, and so we commemorate a miracle that happened thousands of years ago, but every single Chanukah changes my life. and I explore the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages in the works that are drawn from the esoteric tradition, beginning with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, filtered down through the teachings of the Arizal, later the Baal Shem Tov, and there it splinters off into manifold different expressions, and thousands again upon thousands of pages treating the soul of Torah, so that every Hanukkah a person is able to approach, even though we all know the halachos and we're going to light the same candles and we have our family traditions and so on, but on the level of the neshama, it's a completely different thing. In Hanukkah we read about the Nesiim, right? We read about the karbanos that were brought by the Nesiim in the inauguration of Chanukas HaMishkan. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, so here we're sitting in this wonderful place that's imbued with the spirit of the Rebbe. The Lubavitcher Rebbe writes that the whole inyan of the Nesiim and reading the Nesiim seems to be incredibly counterintuitive. Because if there's one thing that you wouldn't think you need to read, it's the bringing of the very same carbon by each of the Nesiim representing the various tribes, because as we're going to lay in on Hanukkah, they literally brought the same offering. And it seems redundant and it seems super lackluster from the standpoint of inspiration. Like, what are we supposed to gain from that? Says the Lubavitcher Rebbe, no, that's the point. Because what we're trying to communicate in this, that the Nesiim all brought the same carbon, even though all of us know that the Shvatim had different flags, had different energies, had different intentions, and what they brought to Am Yisrael in the great mosaic of the Jewish tradition, the Jewish nation, encapsulated in their leadership obviously was different, was that even though it's possible for two people to be doing the same thing, on the level of neshama, kavana, their intention, their understanding, it's a whole different world. And the Rebbe is saying Hanukkah teaches us, Dafka Hanukkah, to look past the surface and to begin to understand that although on the surface these two Nesiim were bringing the same carbon, obviously they all brought their own unique energy to it, because there's more to a mitzvah than simply doing it, with your hands and learning the laws. Hein Gufi Halachos. So Likutei Halachos is a sefer which is quoted by the Rebbe, again, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in various places. In one place he makes reference to it as a rare, or a member of a very rare and unique genre of Jewish text, which is completely focused on the pnimius, on the interiority of halacha. Likutei Halachos, written by Reb Nassan of Breslov, it's another Hasidic tradition, also drawn from the great Beis Medrash of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, who was Rabbi Nachman's great-grandfather. Reb Nassan of Breslov, Rabbi Nachman's primary disciple, wrote an 8-volume set, Likutei Halachos, where he goes through Shulchan Aruch 8 times, as he did in his own learning. And each and every area of halacha is illuminated using the teachings that were revealed by his master, Rabbi Nachman, of whom Reb Nassan was the primary disciple. That Rabbi Nachman said, without Reb Nassan, not one word of my teachings would have been saved. It means everything that we have from Rabbi Nachman essentially comes down through Reb Nassan. He's likened in Breslov theology to the moon that reflects the light of the sun, much like Yoshua and Moshe Rabbeinu, much like the Arizal and Rav Chaim Vital, much like the Baal Shem Tov and either the Maggid or of Yaakov Yosef of Polanya. Every great luminary had a reflector, that was able to take the teachings and communicate them. So Rabbi Nassan's Likutei Halachos is a collection not of laws, but a collection of guidance in how to move, how to grow, how to enable our karbanos nesiim, right? That look the same every year. It's the same Sukkot, the same Pesach, the same, it shouldn't be Tisha B'Av, the same Purim and so on. But Likutei Halachos is a sefer that says, okay, good, so now you've learned the laws, but what is halacha for? What are we supposed to get out of it? What's the deeper meaning, so that we could approach it with consciousness, so that we can understand Judaism as being a vessel for infinite light, that lu yichya gvar shnin alfin, like we sing on Shabbos, if a person lived 2,000 years, we would never be able to scratch even the surface of the depth of what Hanukkah is, albeit the clarity that we think we already have of the limited experience of Hanukkah that we may have experienced every year until now. And so these 8 weeks of immersion in the drashos of Likutei Halachos are focused on enabling us, be'ezras Hashem, when it comes Chanukah Haba Leinu L'Tova, that we already have to be working up our excitement for, which all of us are. That's why we're here. What a privilege. And when we stand there with the candle and we make the bracha the first night with the Asher Kedishanu Mitzvah Mitzvanu, Ahadlik Ner Chanukah. it should be different this year. We should be aware of what's taking place in this moment, in our souls, in the heavens. What thoughts is this meant to conjure up within our deepest, deepest psyche? How are we supposed to exit Hanukkah fundamentally different than we were when we entered it? And can we still hold hope that such a thing is even possible to begin with? That's already a huge tikkun, right? If everyone's here, that means that we're battling Amalek. The whole spirit of Amalek, Asher Karcha B'derech, seeks to cool us off along the derech, along the halacha, right? Along the travels. Because Amalek says, forget it. Like how, the whole thing is so shallow, so just give up. And you and I are here because we know there has to be more. And there is. And we have to give ourselves access to that realm of Torah which is beckoning and inviting us in to the inner chambers of Torah and mitzvahs. The 4 drushas that we're going to be learning from Likutei Halachos, this is not all for tonight, don't worry, this is going to be for 8 weeks, but Ezras Hashem, and so if you do keep it, we just ask that you bring it back, otherwise, and we may not, do we have enough? Do we need to print more for next week? It seems like, okay.
One extra.
Yeah, 1 extra, okay, perfect, good. So listen, unless you're writing notes in it, I recommend let's leave it here, unless you mamash want to review it, in the week, that's also fine. But this is going to be the pamphlet, the booklet for the whole series. And the 4 drushos that we're going to be learning from come from very random areas of halacha. Because if you know Breslov a little bit, it's a hodgepodge. It's a tapestry woven from every single aspect and facet of all of Torah. Rabbi Nachman's Torah demonstrates the unity of every tiny little fragment of Torah to demonstrate the way in which there's not one aspect that's sort of split off from the entirety of the whole, and the Likutei Halachos is no different. So it might confuse us to learn that we're going to be learning about Hanukkah in the halachos of Kibud Rabbo, the Talmud Chacham, the laws of respecting a Rebbe and a Talmud Chacham, the laws of Ashkamas HaBoker, of waking up in the morning, the laws of Shiluach HaKan, I know it sounds very random, it's like what Shaykhis has no connection, and the laws of Kilei Behema, the Klayim of not mixing 2 animals together to plow your field, right? So we're not actually in our study going to be touching on those halachos because Likutei Halachos is very vast. And so each area that we just mentioned, Kilei Behema, is pages and pages and pages and pages, some of which deals with Kilei Behema. Others, as we're seeing, branches off into every area of Jewish thought, and you walk away with a kaleidoscope, you walk away with a tapestry. And that's what's beautiful, but also a bit challenging and potentially confusing for those of us like our shiur, which is jumping in the middle of each of these drushas just to focus on the parts that are speaking about Hanukkah. So don't get thrown off by the title of the various drushas that we're going to be learning. Some of the halachos that I think all of us to one degree or another are familiar, that are going to be illuminated by the teachings, just to give you a taste of the odyssey that we're about to take, and I'm going to sort of rattle this off quickly, I have it written over here, is number 1, why Hanukkah is dafka lit at the neiros, the candles are lit, specifically, at night. What the depth of the Hallel that we sing on Hanukkah is, why the Hanukkah candles are supposed to be lit close to the doorway. What does the name Hanukkah even mean? What's the deeper meaning of Hanukkah? Why are there 36 candles? What's the depth of 36? If you add up all of the different candles, all the nights cumulatively leaving out the Shamish, you have 36. What's the depth of that? Why is it that the halacha dictates that at least ideally the candles, the neiros, are supposed to be lit lemata me'asar tfachim, very low to the ground, underneath 10 tfachim? What's the depth of the machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel with regard to what Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin means? Whether it's that we start with 8 candles on the first night and steadily decrease, or like we paskin, Beis Hillel, where we start with 1 and Mosef Aholich, we add each night. What's the depth of that as it relates to the general understanding of Hanukkah? Just in general, what are these 3 levels as it relates to Hanukkah? The primary level, where there's 1 candle per household, and then Mahadrin, where there's a candle for, Ner Ish Ubesa, where every single person has, and then Ner L'chal Echad B'Echad is Mahadrin, and then Mahadrin Mina Mahadrin, the most ideal is to begin with, like we said, 1 the first night, and then to add. What's the depth of that? And then finally, what is the deeper understanding and the intention for the bracha that we're going to be making be'ezras Hashem when all of us light our Hanukkah candles? Lahadlik ner Hanukkah. What should our intention be? What should our focus be? What are the Rashi Tevos of Lahadlik ner Hanukkah? What are those correlated to elsewhere? And in general, how can we weave a soul That just like the soul that manifests within our body is an absolutely unified entity, but manifests uniquely within the ears and the capacity to hear, and the nose and the capacity to smell. Not my particular nose, because I'm suffering from a very bad cold, but generally, that the nose can smell, and a mouth can talk, right? And the hands can feel, but it's one soul. How can we discover the soul of Hanukkah that we will then see manifest in all of these different areas of halacha, unify them as one, in one experience, so that again, this Hanukkah, we will experience, hopefully, Be'ezras Hashem, not just the body of it, but to really be infused with the soul, to bring our Hanukkah to life, to bring our Yiddishkeit generally to life, as we're going to learn so many different concepts. And it's a great introduction generally to the world of Hasidus and so many other things that we're going to learn, Be'ezras Hashem, in passing as part of this sugya of finding inner peace through the light of Hanukkah. And so with that brief, not so brief, introduction, let's begin. Now, one thing you have to know about Likutei Halachos, this is the Hakdama Shniya, the second introduction, just very briefly. One thing you have to know about Likutei Halachos, I mentioned it before, is that each of the drushos that exist on each topic of halacha, so take for example Shluch HaKan, each of them has 8 discourses. Again, Likutei Halachos is 8 volumes. It's a massive, massive work that Rav Nosson wrote over a period of about 50 years, right? So this was his journey, and you can see, to those who are experts in Likutei Halachos, you can see the distinction in Rav Nosson's thought developing from year to year, from drasha to drasha. It's absolutely incredible. As he worked through the whole Shulchan Aruch, Daled Chalkei Shulchan Aruch, and every single area of halacha, he found what would appear to be, again, a completely unrelated topic that Rabbi Nachman discusses in his 411 lessons in Likutey Moharan, which is his primary sefer, that parenthetically somebody wrote in one of the chats where we were discussing a little bit this idea of, teaching Likutey Halachos and what's historically a Lubavitcher place. So somebody said, what's the problem? Yud Shvat, he said, is the exact gematria as Likutey Moharan. That's what he says. I didn't work it out yet, but that's what he says. We'll chat GPT it later. So he says, so there's obviously a very close connection. But the 411 lessons in Likutey Moharan, which are split into 2 volumes, Likutey Moharan Kama, the first volume, and Likutey Moharan Tinyana, the second volume, Reb Nosson, in his incredible depth and sensitivity to the soul of what Rabbi Nachman was trying to communicate, was somehow able to identify connections between, again, what would seem to be completely disconnected, disparate areas of halacha, and say, okay, this is connected to Torah Lamed Gimel. And the concepts that Rabbi Nachman discusses in Torah Lamed Gimel are going to be used to illuminate various themes and laws that relate to one random area of halacha, hilchas eidus, hilchas mekach umemkar. It's fascinating. Choshen mishpat, the driest of dry laws, become to Rav Nosson, in Rav Nosson's hands, illuminated like you cannot imagine. It's Gan Eden. Rav Nosson said about his sefer that the Shlach Kadosh said that his sefer, that I'm a descendant of Chazei Hashem, the Shlach Kadosh said that his Sfarim are a tam Gan Eden. It's a taste of Gan Eden. Rav Nosson says, "My Likutei Halachos is Gan Eden mamish." He said, "This is actual Gan Eden. It's mind blowing. We're going to experience this. I'm not going to speak so much to praise it. You'll see it. You'll feel it if we're patient and we're consistent with it. You come back a couple of weeks, we'll find ourselves immersing in an ocean of clarity and real illumination, light, mamish light, Gan Eden mamish, paradise. Likutey Moharan is paradise." So Rav Nosson found some, again, what would appear to be random Torah teaching in Likutey Moharan, and he connects it, he uses that lesson to illuminate the areas of halacha. Now, if a person does not know the Likutey Moharan well, right, if we don't know the lesson that Rav Nosson is basing himself off in Likutey Halachos, you might get maybe 5 or 10%. Of the depth and the breadth and the beauty and the ingenuity and the go'inus, the genius of what Rav Nosson does with these teachings. And Rav Nosson, numerous times throughout Likutei Halachos, is warning us. He keeps on saying, go back and learn the teaching. If you don't know the teaching that he's basing it off, it's a commentary. So it's like learning Rashi without the pasuk. You have to see the pasuk. You can't just open Taisus Harash on a sugya if you don't know the sugya. So it's something like that. So really, the ideal way to learn Likutei Halachos would to be, if we had many more weeks, and if we were preparing for Hanukkah, maybe starting from Tisha B'Av, which might be an idea for next year. Maybe we'll see. We'll be in Yerushalayim. There will be no Tisha B'Av, but still to prepare. we would be learning the Likutey Moharan inside really, really well. That itself would take many weeks because it's incredibly deep and complex, and it takes a lot of time to really go through properly. And then we would go to the Likutei Halachos, but we don't really have the opportunity and privilege to do that now. So what we will do, though, just for the necessary, like I would say the crucially necessary point for at least the first drasha, and the others are sort of, I'll help you guys out along the way, and we'll sort of find our way with it. We have to learn just a bit of Likutei Moharan Tinyana 8, and that's the first source on the paper. This comes from, again, Tinyana is the second volume of Likutei Moharan, which is Rabbi Nachman's magnum opus, his primary work. And this comes from the 8th lesson, which again, I'll remind you, is very long, okay? The Torah Ches is pages and pages and pages and pages. It's one of the last, if not the last teaching that Rabbi Nachman ever revealed. It's known as Rabbi Nachman's last will and testament. It took him hours and hours to teach. And so we're just taking, again, a tiny taste. Let's begin all b'siyata d'shmaya, davening at the outset that we should be privileged, first of all, to have Godspeed, because it will take us, at least 8 weeks to get through all of this, especially at the pace that we've begun going at. But we're going to try to speed up, as the word halacha connotes. We're going to try to actually move b'siyata d'shmaya. But we daven that Hashem should help, that our word should be nosechein be'enei Elohim va'adam. Our intention is l'shem shemayim, and that all of us, just by being here, should already be constructing vessels that when it comes Hanukkah and the illumination, it will have somewhere to go. It will have somewhere to rest and to stay and to fill our lives with illumination and b'siyata d'shmaya. So we begin. Says the Heilige Rebbe Zchus Yagan Aleinu, Rabbi Nachman writes as follows: V'al yidei hispashtus hanavua. Again, we're jumping in the middle of a very, very long, glorious lesson. We're just taking one tiny little part. Through the proliferation of prophecy that is going to unfold as we approach the end days, which is the whole subject of that glorious teaching. It's one of Rabbi Nachman's most poetic and visionary. He was a lofty, elevated soul, So it's one of his most poetic teachings. But as we get to the end and there's a proliferation of the spirit of Nevuah, Al Yedei Zeh, one of the functions of this spread of prophecy is Nizbarer v'nistakein b'chinas Koach HaMedameh. It will be clarified and rectified. B'chinas in Rabbi Nachman is the most popular, famous word, and it means an aspect of. Rabbi Nachman is always referring to aspects because, again, he's treating the multifaceted nature of a thing. And so he's constantly talking, it has many aspects, like a diamond, many facets. This rectifies a facet or an aspect of what's called Koach HaMedameh. What does Koach mean? Koach is a force. Medameh is imagination. Excellent. Koach HaMedameh, like dimyon, means a person imagines something. The human being has a capacity to imagine. Reb Nassan Likutei Halachos in a number of places also based on this drasha, not in these areas, but in Birchas HaReach Dalit, if you ever want to go Likutei Halachos in the very first volume, in Birchas HaReach is all founded on this topic of the Koach HaMedameh. And Reb Nassan goes at length over there to explain that the Koach HaMedameh is essentially the place of free choice, of Bechira. Because to choose means that a person is seeing more than what they just see in front of their eyes. Because the Bechira always is between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is able to show it. The Yetzer Hara has cash, like liquid. He's able to give it to us up front. Like, this is what you're going to get if you engage in this experience, if you speak this way, think this way, do this thing, right? It's there. But in order to really choose to overcome that impulse, to give in to what in Chabad is the Nefesh HaBahamis, right, the Yetzer Hara, that lower self, a person needs to utilize the Koach HaMedameh to imagine, even though, again, imagine as like a negative connotation, like it doesn't exist. No, imagine just means that we have the capacity to live in a different world than the world that we see with our own eyes. Children live in a different world. It's the same world that we live in, but because children have an active imagination, if not the holiest per se, because imagination needs cleansing. A person can imagine any number of things. But meaning in life, we can use another word that's in vogue today, fortunately or unfortunately, is the word narrative, right? Everybody has their own narrative. A narrative means that we process reality in a specific way. In Breslov, this processing capacity is called the Koach HaMedameh. Means that I invest a particular experience with meaning from my own perspective. And that's what we're called upon to do. Because a person otherwise can live in a purely rationalist, materialist, physical world where there's nothing more to life than meets the eye. That sounds familiar. Because that's Yavan, as we're going to see. Well, the whole thing of Yavan was just what we can sense, what we can feel, what we can taste. We're going to get into this, B'ezras Hashem. To be a Jew means that we aren't allowing ourselves to be limited by the brick walls that we face anytime we try to move ahead in this world of the physical. We have a wonderful, wonderful Koach HaMedameh. We have an amazing imagination that enables us to see within the foods that we're eating, as we're going to learn, an opportunity for closeness with the divine. This is not just like, okay, I happen to be hungry, so I better stuff my face, and now I'll have some more energy. It's like, wait a second. It's the same eating as the next guy over on the, the tube, whatever, somebody's eating a sandwich, and we're pulling something out, and you make a bracha on it. It's koach hadimyon, right? It means to say that we're using our narrative capacity to experience this thing in a completely different way. And to the extent that our koach hamedameh is salid, which means that our youthful, childlike capacity to engage in a world that's bursting with meaning that goes beyond what our eyes can see, what our hands can feel, what our ears can hear, and our all the other senses can accomplish, etc. To the extent that that's dim and dull, that's the extent to which a person is trapped in the world of physical. But to be mevarer, to clarify our koach hamedameh, our capacity to, again, imagine, but not in a pejorative, negative sense, our capacity to really immerse ourselves in a world that's of our own making, right? Because, again, so much gesundheit, so much of what we experience is narrative-oriented. What are our narratives? What do we see when we see another person? What do we see when we wake up in the morning and we have a whole day ahead of us? Like, what is a day? What is it to be alive? Like, what is humanity? What can I accomplish? Why am I here? What is your dimyon, right? What is your imaginative approach to life? To the extent that that's cleansed, we live with what's called emunah. Emunah is beyond what our eyes can see, beyond what our brain can grasp. Emunah is tapped into with our koach hamedameh, where a person sort of, again, imagines the world to be very different. Very, very different. Hey, thanks for coming. The world to be very, very different than the world that the person, again, sitting next to a Baal Emunah experiences. Even though, as we're going to see from the Ishbitz or the Mea Shilach and the next piece, and then we'll just stick to Likutei Halachos, it's the same world, but it's two completely different worlds. Says Rabbi Nachman, when the spirit of prophecy proliferates, this is going to clarify our koach hamedameh, bebechinas, an aspect of the pasuk in Hosea, ubiyad hanavim adameh. Hashem says, my prophecies come down biyad neviim, in the hands of the prophets adameh, right? I appear in a like form. The prophets were imaginative. The prophets had a clarified sense of being able to see past the physical, to be able to confer upon everything that you experience a higher narrative, a deeper narrative, a narrative of faith. And that enabled them to tap into that actual realm that exists in ways that are actually more real than the forms that we experience. What's the content that we give them, though? And the Nevi'im lived in the world of symbols, not of form. The Nevi'im only saw the symbols. That's what the Medrash tells us, that the whole essence of what it meant to be a Navi was medameh, same word, tsura liyotzra. That's the Medrash, Pirkei the Rebbe Lazar. That what it meant to be a prophet was to see tsura, was to see a form, but to see the spiritual energy that made that form. When they saw a human being, they didn't see a human. They saw the spiritual energies that manifested in eyes and a nose and a mouth and the body. Nothing stam. When they saw grass outside, they saw the letter Vav of Yudke Vavke, from which the plants of this world draw their energy. When they saw inanimate objects, that was the last Hey of Yudke Vavke. Everything in the world, the sun, the moon, clouds, different times of different hours, different days, different months, different years. The Nevi'im lived in a world of symbol But it wasn't that the Nevi'im, again, were so naively attempting to sort of, infuse some meaning into this fundamentally meaningless place. The Nevi'im lived so rooted in that realm of symbols that to them there was no form. Memela, they had cleansed and clarified the external to such a degree that their Koach HaMedameh was wide open to receive communications from that realm. Because they understood that this realm is just communications. Are we receptive to them? Is our Koach HaMedameh clarified? Do we live with emunah? Now again, on the surface, what does emunah mean? A person believes, he has faith that there's a God who created this world. But to the Baal Shem Tov, it's cute, it's madrega. But to the Baal Shem Tov, emunah meant dveikus. This you'll find in Keser Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov says emunah equals dveikus. Dveikus means intimacy. Dveikus means that it isn't just, as an aside, I'm a religious person, I believe that this world was created by God. To a person who really has emunah, there is no world, bichlal. They say over also Chabad story, where one of the Chabad mashpim, can't remember exactly who it was, I'm sure the Chaver will fill in my admittedly large blanks in this area, but he said, before I learned Chabad Chasidus, I knew that there was a world and I believed that there's a God. He says, after immersing myself in Chasidus, I know that there's a God, and sometimes I also have to believe that there's a world. Maybe there's also this thing called a world, is that familiar? I don't remember. Okay, so we're in the same boat. But that's what it is. The Nevi'im live in a world, not of tzura, of form, but of yotzra. They find the Creator everywhere. Because everything is the tselem of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything is saturated with the spirit of the divine, that God is not somewhere up there with a long white beard and a stick, or whatever. This is HaKadosh Baruch Hu's manifestation. This is His presence. Malay chal ha'aretz kavaydai. The whole earth is saturated with His glory. Les asar panei minei. There's no place that's vacant of Him. He surrounds all worlds and He fills all worlds. That's a different emunah. That's something else. And that was the emunah of the Nevi'im. Ubiyad hanaviim adame, ki ikar tekunu be'er hamadame ukashu biyad hanaviim. Because the primary clarification of our capacity for imagination is manifested fully in the Nevi'im, in the prophets. And don't think that there was just sort of like a segment of Am Yisrael that were called prophets. Because you and I are prophets. Because like Hillel says, the Gemara Psachim, Imloi Nevi'im Heim, although we might not actually be prophets, B'nei Nevi'im Heim, we are children of prophets. But the Piasatz Rebbe makes very clear in Akdamat Chavis HaTalmidim and in many other places in his writings that the words B'nei Nevi'im don't mean like children of prophets any more than a Ben Torah means a son of a Torah scroll. What does it mean, a Ben Torah? Right? It means a person who has a very deep connection and a bond with Torah. Says the Piasatz, if you're a Ben Navi, that means that you have a little bit of a tinge of prophecy in you. And now we understand why. Because Nevuah wasn't, again, just something that some privileged members of the nation had. Nevuah is emunah at the end of the road, right? When you follow the emunah road all the way to the end, fully and in every way, so it doesn't just exist from the standpoint of perspective and not of thought, which is neshama, and not just of speech, which is better, which is ruach, but mamish, our maisa, our nefesh, our actions are saturated with the clarity of emunah, where a person lives surrounded by a world, but that's mamish God, and lives that way to align oneself with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ritzaynenu, La'asais Ritzaynecha. Our only will and motivation in this life is to be aligned with you and to channel your presence down through our little mini Tselem Elokim, to be a mouthpiece like we learned this morning in Keser Shem Tov with some of the Chevra for the Shechina. That's why I'm here. That's why we're here. That's why this whole project of existence exists to begin with. So when a person follows the Emunah road to the end, so then you're a Navi. Right? Then you're a Navi. But any little bit of emunah that we have, if it's mamish emunah, from the standpoint of the Baal Shem, real emunah, panemius emunah, it's nivuah. It's nivuah. So says Rabbi Nachman, ki ikar tiknu be'er hamadameh, the clarification of our Koach HaMedameh hu kishu biyad hanavim. This manifests in our prophetic capacity. And when that capacity is rectified, is healed, then a person lives with faith, not an intellectual, philosophical faith, but an immersive experience where it actually changes us. And it changes the way that we perceive things. Then we flip through the news, and we don't just see the news, and also we're Orthodox Jews reading the news, and those things rhyme. But it's mamish, a person literally sees Hashem. Like every single thing we do, the food that we eat, the business dealings that we engage with, how we speak to people, what we think about people, how we understand our role in the narrative of history, the Umos HaOlam, and literally everything is absolutely saturated with this faith perspective. And then all other kinds of narratives are absolutely eradicated, because remember, the atheists will have us think that we're the ones going out on a limb, to sort of come up with some interpretation of reality. What they don't understand is that they also have an interpretation of reality, because no one knows for sure. Not in the way that we know that this is a table, because we've understood a table to be a flat surface with 4 or 3 or however many legs will hold it up. It's all dimyan. No one really knows. We don't know. So it's one emunah or another. Are we going to choose to live in a naturalistic universe and all we see is just the external of the external of the external of the world? That's a choice. Or are we going to choose emunah? And this is not me saying choosing emunah. It was the biggest Baal emunah, maybe, that we have in all of Jewish history, which is David HaMelech, who writes in Tehillim, Derech emunah bacharti. The path of faith, bacharti. I chose the path of faith. A person doesn't just discover faith when you decide to get serious and start really looking into the proofs, and go to Aish and take a seminar and, whatever. That's not it. Faith is a choice. Atheism is a choice. You're going to have to choose one way or another. David HaMelech says, cool, derech emunah bacharti. I chose the path of a clarified Koach HaMedameh because I refuse to believe that I live in a meaningless universe. And let my choosing to see faith and to see meaning itself confer meaning onto this meaningless place. So that, as we're going to learn in the next piece from the Mei HaShiloach, it's an ontological truth. This is very, very deep. If all humans choose to see a faithless, hopeless, meaningless, purposeless world, guess what? It's a hopeless, meaningless, purposeless world. And to the extent that human beings who were given the mandate, as the Psukim in Bereshis make clear, to literally control the earth, which is what's like the Jews, all humanity is meant to oversee the functionality of nature. That's why we're here. We're the cultivators. Everything else is a stage that's set for the human to walk upon it. If all of humanity, and it begins with the individual, and it begins with Am Yisrael, if all of humanity wakes up to faith, then you better believe the world is meaningful, because it's up to us. It's up to us. And our Koach HaMedameh. Says the Rebbe, Ki ikra ha'emunah tluya b'koach HaMedameh, because the essence of faith depends on the capacity of medameh, of dimyon, of imagination. Because something that your brain can understand is not really emunah oriented. And again, this doesn't mean that emunah is baseless or that emunah is not logical or rational. It's not what it means. But it means from the standpoint of fact. Sometimes, right, 1 + 1. I mean, it's something that's demonstrable, something that's, from our standpoint as human beings, concrete. So again, it doesn't mean that it's not rational, logical, that we can't build a philosophy around it, under it, over it, which of course we can and we do, and it's called the Kuzari, and it's called Reb Sadi Goyin, and it's called the Rambam, and it's called, in a certain sense, Lahavdil, the Ari and the Zohar Kadosh. We have philosophies galore. But ultimately, if you think about it, and it's not so nice to say this, but it's true, the word faith is super similar to the word opinion, right? In a certain way. A person, this is my faith. Oh, so you mean this is your opinion, right? Because we have bechira in this world. And again, it is a choice. It's a choice if you're conscious. If you're asleep, it's not a choice. And even if it's the choice that you chose, but you didn't really choose it because you were just brought up in this culture. And so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Avram Avinu, the first Jew, you have to know the first thing you have to do is lech lecha. You have to choose it. It has to become yours. And all the while that it isn't ours, so the Chanukah is just a Chanukah of Likutei Halachos on the level of just keeping the law, and it means nothing, and we carry on, and our life is essentially a completely secular life that a little bit is tinged with Jewish culture. But when a person chooses it for real, and a person understands my whole life hinges on this, like what does it mean to be a human? And derech emuna b'charti, we take our own individual journey toward it, toward that promised land, el aretz asher areka, which the Mefarshim explain, areka isn't God telling Avram where it is. He says, no, I'll show it to you. Because it's always going to be a bit vague. Because you're never quite going to be able to put your finger on it. It's a journey. But we take that journey to attempt to discover meaning, to create meaning, to channel meaning through our thoughts, our words, our actions. So then to that extent, we are tapping into an emunah that is beyond what our seichel is able to actually, sort of prove and know definitively. The ikra emunah hirak b'makom shah seichel nifsak, and so that's what emunah means. It's where our seichel ends. And we're not able to really understand the thing with our seichel, to be able to prove it, put our finger on it. There's always going to be free choice. That's life. Hashem says, I put before you bracha, uklala, ubacharta b'chaim, choose life. But there's always going to be the very real option of opting out of it. Anybody who says, there's a bunch of fools, people don't believe in God, they're not fools. They have a koach HaMedameh like you have a koach HaMedameh. And their interpretation is not your interpretation. Otherwise, it wouldn't be equal. And it has to be equal. There is a very real option of opting out of this particular way of seeing the world. That's very real. And we shouldn't shy away from that as religious Jews. We should know that and respect it. We have to respect that. Because that's the integrity of the whole system of God creating a world where there's actually free choice. Otherwise, so then it would be so obvious. It isn't so obvious if we're being honest. We choose this. It's an opinion. It's faith. Amish faith. So, when a person doesn't really understand something with their mind, so then all that's left is just, again, this imaginative faculty, and that's the realm where we can confer meaning upon existence. That's called faith. The primary area of faith is in our conferring of meaning upon existence. In another place, Rabbi Nachman says we no longer call it the Yetzer Hara. In Breslov, they don't refer to the Yetzer Hara. They refer to the Yetzer Hara as the Koach HaMedameh. That's how we refer to the Yetzer Hara. Because what is the Yetzer Hara if not that which is attempting to cause us to consider different experiences in line with its own narrative and not our narrative? To trick us into thinking that something is what it isn't. Right? Namely, that this experience is going to give me happiness, meaning, fulfillment, satisfaction. It's a dimion. The whole thing is a dimion. It's all mirage. It's an illusion. As Rabbi Nachman explains elsewhere in Sichos on another fundamental sefer of Rabbi Nachman's teachings in the 6th lesson, Rabbi Nachman says we can compare the Koach HaMedameh, the Yetzer Hara, to someone who runs in the shuk in the marketplace with a hand held high. It's a very famous parable. And in his hand, he's proclaiming that he doesn't actually say anything. He's just running around, and everybody starts to chase him because who knows what this person has in his hand. And you know how it goes. One person looks up and starts pointing. All of a sudden, a whole crowd comes. The whole crowd, like a mob of people, is chasing this guy through the whole marketplace, and he's holding in his hand what everybody begins to think, he has the key to everything that I need. And this person, everyone's running after him, pursuing him, and at the end, he opens his hand, and there's nothing inside. This is the Koach HaMedameh. This is the Yetzer Hara. There is nothing at the end of his road, and at the end of the Yetzer Tov, or the Nefesh Elokis road, is prophecy. Is being able actually to open up a portal to the world of symbols, and to have those symbols communicated to us from an objective standpoint where we can begin to bring meaning down into this world that's communicated again, by the true existence, which is Hashem, which is the soul of the world. V'al kain, therefore, al yidei espashtus hanavua. Once the spirit of prophecy spreads and Am Yisrael wakes up, all of us have our capacity of prophecy awakened within us. Shal yidei is bar v'nestakin HaMedameh, which is exactly what's happening according to the Chavos HaTalmid and the Piyasetzner Rebbe with the proliferation and the advent of Chasidus, is bringing prophecy back. This was the Baal Shem Tov. As we get closer to the Geula, like Mashiach, right, is maybe imagined, but Mashiach tells the Baal Shem HaKadosh that the Baal Shem Tov experiences Mashiach telling him, when your teachings spread outward, then Mashiach not will come, but Mashiach will already be here, because every single person will be activated from the standpoint of prophetic faith. Memela, the world will be fixed. Memela, the world will be saturated with a spirit of nevuah, of direct encounter with Hashem again, emunah dveikus, right? Connection to God in every aspect of life, and every moment, every circumstance, every challenge, and failure, and success, and experience. And so, according to the Piyasetzner Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov intended to bring prophecy back to Am Yisrael. What prophecy was now going to be prophets? It sounds a bit out there. And the answer is, again, on the level of B'nai Nevi'im, we all have prophecy in us. It's called emunah, but it's called an emunah that's deeper than just a theological, theoretical, philosophical, institutional, organizational, communal belief in God. It's lived. It's an immersive, first-person, dveikus, debek, glue experience. Like it's here. It's not somewhere else. Through this, says the Rebbe, through this is spashtus hanavua, which is brought about through the teachings of Chasidus, which we're going to be learning together, Be'ezras Hashem, for the next few weeks, and Be'ezras Hashem beyond. Sha'al yidei zen is bar v'nestakin HaMedameh, that through this our Koach HaDimyon will be clarified. Al yidei zen nestakin ha'amunah amitius t'kedusha. So then again, our faith, true, holy faith, like real emunah, is Be'ezras Hashem gonna come back. Gonna come back to us. Going to really be tapped into and experienced viscerally by every member of the nation, with all of the incredible implications that that's going to have for the ways that our shuls look. I'm sure the shul is exalted. It's my first time here, I'm ashamed to say, but I'm sure the davening is mamish lit, but it's not like that in all places. And it has to do with a lack of emunah, because Rabbi Nachman says challenges in davening have to do with a certain way. If a person really believed that Hashem is mamish standing there listening to you, you wouldn't talk to the person next to you, because it's mamish emunah. You're too busy talking to Hashem to talk to someone else. People wouldn't get angry. People wouldn't get frustrated. People wouldn't get anxious. People wouldn't get all worked up when their narrative is challenged, because they're broader and they're deeper and they're more sensitive. And like step after step after step after step, the nation will be activated. And this will bring us to all the verses in Navi that describe a proliferation of universal God consciousness as we approach the end of days. Umala aretz deas Hashem kamayim li'amachasim, where the whole entire world will be saturated with the knowledge of God. Knowledge, das, is dveikus, right? V'yeda adam eschave ishta is referring to intimacy. The world will be intimate with HaKadosh Baruch Hu again. And God will be here, not because He isn't now, but because our Koach HaDimyon has in many, many ways been shutting Him out. And when we are able to let Him in and discover that reality that exists, maybe even more fundamentally than whatever physical experience we sort of encounter on a surface level, so then we were swimming in it all along. This is it. This is all HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But it takes a lot of work, and this is the work that we're going to attempt to do, Be'ezras Hashem. So we have 3 minutes. We'll just do questions. Next week we're going to I wanted to cover the first the first 2 teachings tonight. We had a lengthy introduction. Next week we'll start for the Me'as Shiloach, which is also just very, very similar to this piece from Rabbi Nachman, also very important and very radical in certain ways, as we're going to see, and then straight into Likutei Halachos. We're jumping into the deep end. But we're going to try, again, b'siyata d'shmaya, to take step after step with the intention of experiencing a Yiddishkeit that isn't just the guf of halacha, but is infused with the neshama of a conscious experience of closeness with the Master of Heaven and Earth, Be'ezras Hashem. Yeah.
Just interesting, he's talking about Koach HaMedameh. The Rebbe mentioned, whatever, in the 90s, about a prophecy that before Mashiach comes, there is going to be Nevuah is going to come back. And so in a certain way over here, the way he's saying Nevuah, it's not just, those prophets who give, but also the Koach HaMedameh. So in a certain way, it started already from Baal Shem.
Absolutely, without a question.
Trying to go beyond what you
Mamash.
see. And the truth is, I think the Koach HaMedameh of Kedusha is so much stronger the last 30 years, 20 years, 10 years. Many people that did not see at all godliness or miracles, now, especially in the past year, all of a sudden, even the usual, they have a much more refined Koach HaMedameh, and perhaps that's why the Koach HaMedameh of Klippa has gone also wild, because Zelmazeh.
Gotta be a balance.
People can imagine that they are a shiur here, there,
and virtual reality, etc., etc. You know, people could literally spend most of their waking hours not where they actually are. You know, in different. So that's Koach HaMedameh that has it's a spectrum. But you're 1,000,000% right. This is the spirit of Nevuah. It's a pasuk that says Az eshboiches ruchi I'll call basar. It's a pasuk in Yoel. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I will pour out my spirit upon I'll call basar, really on all flesh, on all humankind. V'nivu b'neichem u'b'neisechem, and the children will have prophecy. Why the children? So you look at the Malbim over there, not getting into that now, but because children are imaginative. So it's much more natural for a child to experience the prophetic energy than it is for an adult. Because to children, faith is like obvious. Like, of course the world was created. Like what? There are people who don't believe that the world was created. There was a study out of Cambridge University, if I'm not mistaken, that says that children who did not grow up under the conditioning of a religious household naturally believed when asked that the world was created. It's like obvious. Like to children, it's obvious. Because their Koach HaMedameh is activated. Mamish activated. And it can go either way. You know, as they get a little bit older and teenagehood, the Koach HaMedameh could go crazy. You know, that's the Yetzer Hara that convinces them that, you know, etc., etc., etc. And into adulthood and on and on and on and on and on. The more we feed it, and the more that we're like sort of withholding ourselves from clarifying the Koach HaMedameh. But that is what's taking place right now. There are 200 years left to the Elef HaShvi'i. We are at the very, very end of history. These are not regular times. And so learning these teachings is more crucial now than ever before. It's exactly what our neshamas need. It's what our children really are yearning for. So Alavai, they would teach it in the schools, which one day, if I have my way, they will. And we have our way. But this is it. This is it. You know, we have to make Yiddishkeit everything again, you know, and great and holy and deep and activated, and like we have to change the world. We have to change the world. And it begins by first being active in our Yiddishkeit. And we're going to do it. We're going to do it with the help of the tzaddikim, and that's what we're going to learn about, the importance of the tzaddikim that were revealing these teachings. And without them, you know, we would be walking in the dark. And we're going to learn a lot about tzaddikim, connecting to tzaddikim. But those tzaddikim that were revealing the neshama of Torah. That's our focus, that's our hope, that's our blessing, and that's our tefillah. I think it's a great start, and we will see you next week. Thank you so much for joining.
על כל נשימה שאני נושם